You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 395 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
There have been better weekends, I suppose.
Yeah, I was hoping that this wasn't going to be the final podcast for the 2025 baseball season. Alas, the Cubs did not defeat the Milwaukee Brewers in Game 5. But to help us recap all 5 games of that series, to help us unpack what the future may hold for the Chicago Cubs, a man who was in attendance for those games. You know him from his work over at CHGO and, of course, his many appearances here on this podcast. Jared Wyllys, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Thanks, as always, for having me.
Were you at all 5 games?
Yeah. If you had gotten us a win in Game 2, we would have won the series. You know that, right? Like, what were you doing?
I know. Well,
sorry.
Ironically,
sorry to jump in.
Funnily enough, that's the one game that I was not in attendance for. So
I think
if we're trying to really figure out what went wrong, there's a clear answer.
Jeremy and I were 3-0 at games that we attended. Although unfortunately one was the same game, so it's kind of a double.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, this was a best of 5.
Yeah, right.
So let's start from the beginning then. We will talk about the first 2 games of that series in Milwaukee. The Cubs, Game 1 of the series in Milwaukee, immediately blown out of the water. 6 runs.
Fastest game of the year.
6 runs from the Brewers in the first, and never had a chance in that one. They just ran away with it, Jared.
Couldn't wait for college football games to start that day after the first inning of that game. It's like, what are we doing the rest of the day?
That was one of the most profound this is over barely before it started. We make the joke like fans aren't even in their seats yet and the game's already over, but that was genuinely one that was like that. From a writer perspective, I was able to start writing my game story in the 3rd inning, which was selfishly kind of nice because it meant less work afterward. But yeah, it was
glad we could save you some time.
Right. I would rather
the theme being Boyd on short rest, not a great idea.
Boyd short rest didn't work, and that was evident right from the get-go. I don't think it was, as we could look back on it now, nothing was really wrong with him other than it was just short rest, and he clearly was not in a place to do that, and so he wasn't executing his pitches the way that he normally might, and this is just what happened.
The only reason he pitched on short rest is because the Cubs lost 5 in a row versus Cincinnati and New York. That required our starters to actually have to pitch the last week of the season, unfortunately, and then it screwed up the rotation for the Padres, and then again for this. But we talked about that in our podcast last week after the Padres series, and I think I was begging to have him start Game 2, and then have showed in Game 3. But it seemed like a little bit of a desperation to pitch him in Game 1. Turns out maybe it was the weirdest first inning I've experienced in a while, because I went from having Dexter Fowler Game 7 World Series vibes when
Michael Busch
up with the home run, and then by the bottom of the first, I had 2008 Dodgers vibes when all 4 infielders made errors. After the Nico Horner era, I'm like, oh my God, this is 2008 Dodgers all over again.
It did feel very similar to that. And I can't remember the last time in any game where I've seen 3 pitches, 3 doubles like that. I mean, it was just so fast. The game turned so quickly. And then, the Nico Horner error, that was the moment that I was like, oh, this is not going to be the Cubs day. Yeah. The juju is all bad.
So we had hypothesized that the Cubs would start that game with either Colin Ray or Javier Assad. Assad was not even on the playoff roster. Can anybody explain that to me? Because we had to keep Ben Brown because of his swing and miss against the Brewers. Did he pitch a meaningful?
No.
No.
Well, that was the explanation we got, because it was genuinely perplexing. When Assad was left off of the wild card roster, that at least I thought, okay, I can kind of see. He pitched Sunday, right? That last game of the regular season.
And
so
during that game, which I was at against the Cardinals, I was like, are they going to take him out? Why aren't they taking him out? Because it's 79 pitches now. Like I was already suspicious that he wasn't going to be on the roster and I could justify it away as well. It's a 3-game series, so you probably don't need him as much for that. But then when they didn't have him on the second one, what's the real reason behind this? I'm dying to know.
I have my suspicions, because I was convinced that he was going to be on the division roster. I didn't think a thing of it when he was left off the wild card roster, because that at least made a little bit of sense. But I was completely convinced he was going to be on the division series roster. And the only explanation we got was that they saw it as a decision between Ben Brown and Assad. And yet, like you said, it was about Ben Brown's swing and miss stuff, except there was never a point where Ben Brown was used in any meaningful way, whereas there could have been a use for Assad that might have benefited you in this series. And so it was surprising, because I think there was a way in game 1 to pitch it a little differently, so that you go Boyd in game 2 and save Imanaga for game 3 at home. And because that's the big difference was, does Imanaga pitch at Wrigley versus Miller Park? Because going into those first 2 games, the thinking was always, I think like anybody, just win one of those.
Yeah.
And you're fine. Because I think I had full confidence they were going to win both the games at Wrigley. That was never really a concern. So the thinking was, just take one of these 2 games. So honestly, when they lost game 1 on Saturday, I thought, okay, well, that was a dud. You flush that one, go win game 2 on Monday night, no big deal. And then Cubs in 4, all is well.
But the other thought was that if you do this, right, if you start with Boyd in game 1 and you're going to go Shota in game 2, if you're going to, that you would piggyback them with Assad in one of the games and Colin Ray in the other, right? That would have been because you figured, okay, if you get 4 out of Boyd, then you go to the righty, you go to Assad.
Right.
If you start with Imanaga, maybe get 4 out of him, and then you switch over to Colin Ray in game 2. And then you could still come back with Boyd in game 5 if you wanted to, I guess. Like it was, but when they started with Boyd, they didn't have Assad even on the roster. The whole thing went sideways fast, it seemed like. And then they were reluctant to pitch Colin Ray. Of course, it turns out they had to use him in game 5, so, whatever. But I just don't understand the logic behind the moves. I don't. I mean, your explanation is I'm sure what they say, but it still doesn't make sense.
Right. And that's the hard part, is like, you ask in the media sessions that you ask these questions, but then you get answers that even as you're getting the answer, okay, well, this doesn't really answer my question, or this doesn't really make sense. And you can try to, follow up, and you can, there's things you can do to try to get the answer that is maybe the real answer. But in some cases, they're just never going to tell you.
Can you just tell them, hey, that's not true, when they give you a phony answer?
That's what Paul Sullivan's for.
Yeah, right.
He's good at that. Credit to him. But no, if my speculation, and I'm not alone in thinking this, is they just didn't trust Assad in, the pressure situation perhaps of a playoff series.
Unlike a Ben Brown, who obviously you have full confidence in a hostage situation.
I think it was a little bit of that, and partially because Assad had spent a chunk of the year on the injured list, and so there were.
So he was fresh.
So right, and this, well, this is the hard part, because I think what this shows is I'm trying to like search for an explanation. It's just ultimately, I think it boils down to perhaps getting a little too cute about, oh, Ben Brown's got this good swing and miss stuff. The Milwaukee Brewers offensive profile is X, Y, and Z. And so Brown is 0.5% more likely to get a strikeout than Assad, all that kind of stuff, where sometimes it's like, all things considered, who's the better pitcher, and that's the guy that you take. And in that case, it's clearly Assad.
Who can also pitch deeper into games too, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah. Which would have benefited you, take game one where, they had to go with Soroka, who couldn't even do much for them. Like you might have seen a little bit of a difference if it's Assad that comes in after Boyd. Which I guess, even as I say that, I don't know.
I'll go one more.
Yeah.
I'll say in game two, when they finally brought in Colin Ray, when it was already 7-3, right, in the seventh inning or whatever, like late in the game or sixth inning when it was too late, they bring him in and he pitches 3 innings, and they have to come back to him in game 5. Wouldn't it have been nice if you could have used Assad there for those 3 innings, down by 4 runs, or the famous Ben Brown with his swing and miss stuff, and then bring Colin Ray fresh in game 5 so that he's not, having just pitched a couple days before.
Yeah, because Ray did well in game 5, but, is there a little, just enough of a difference if he's more fresh? Perhaps, because at game 5 boiled down to managed to hit more solo homers than the other. And so, does it really make a difference? I don't know. But yeah, it seems like pitching plan wise that they just got a little too cute at times, and that cost them.
Speaking of home runs, that was the story of game 2, where Imanaga did Imanaga things that he's been doing recently, and that's giving up home runs.
Is there anything more demoralizing than getting a 3-run home run in the first in a game that you think you can steal, and then turning around and giving it back up like immediately?
Right back. I mean, when Suzuki hit the 3-run homer in the first, that my immediate reaction was, because it was the only game that I watched at home, was, I turned to my wife and I just said, okay, they've got this one.
Yep.
Because that's the way it felt.
And it was off of Ashby. This was their
right. This was like you did it, and then when they turned around and responded, it was I think down deep after they lost game 2, I knew like they're not going to win this series. Because that was the one, again, given the way that the Boyd start went in game 1, you absolutely had to take game 2, and it just didn't work.
No, a loss 7-3. Just absolutely disappointing. As you were going into the first home game, though, down 0-2, Jared, when getting to talk to the team and their media availability for this ahead of the game, how was the team more positive because they were coming back? Were they able to shake off some of the game 1 and 2 bad juju that we were talking about there?
Yeah, because I think nation of had a day off, they're back at home, they know they're playing the next games at Wrigley, and so there was a game 3. There was a much different because really winning 2 games in a row isn't that big of a deal. It's not that hard to do. And obviously, the playoffs are a different animal, but to say this team needs to win 3 in a row, that's not too tall an order.
That's exactly what I told Tom Ricketts when I saw him actually on Wednesday before the game. I said, it's one at a time,
Yeah.
He's like, that's right. That's a lesson that
Wrigley,
it's a lesson I learned once back in 2015 when none other than Cubs hitting coach John Maley was at breakfast sitting next to me, at a table next to me. And I turned to him, I said, what do you think? He's like, you just got to play them one at a time now. It's just one game at a time. And that was when they were down 3-0 to the Mets and famously then lost that day and were swept. But, the point was he's right. And I actually thought Wednesday before the game that the mood was surprisingly not as somber as it might have been for being down 2-0. I thought people like fans, like Cubs execs, others, people were like, okay, well, let's, now we're at home. Let's see what we do here. And I think they came out and played like that. It was a nerve-wracking game, I might add. But I was impressed with the overall sort of behavior and attitude. And I think having won the World Series a couple of years ago actually probably helped us in terms of mentally, frankly.
Yeah, I think, and even among the fan base, I think you saw a difference in this postseason appearance and how, what the fans' demeanor was, and I think the World Series title less than a decade ago helped because there wasn't the same kind of nervous energy in the fan base that I think you've seen in other years, even coming back to Wrigley down, 0-2. So even with the way that game started, with that weird kind of infield fly that wasn't called an infield fly for some reason when Michael Busch loses it in the sun because we're starting at 4:00 and it's shining directly in his face. Even there, and the Brewers got a run ultimately in the top of the first. Even then, there wasn't quite the same feeling in the ballpark that you might have felt if this was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And it helps too that the Cubs turned around and took back the lead in the bottom half of that inning. So, the Brewers lead was short-lived in Game 3. But I do think there is something to be said for having won the World Series and then now seeing the Cubs go through at least, 2 rounds of the playoffs this year. The first significant postseason appearance since their World Series core has been, since moved on. And that was one of the bigger takeaways to me was it was disappointing to lose to the Brewers in the division series, but it's just not the same. The feeling isn't the same. And I think it's improved.
Yeah. The Cubs were able to put up 4 in the first, and having that lead for Tyone to then settle in with a 4-1 lead really helped. His performance was absolutely impressive and much needed. I mean, just getting 4 innings out of Tyone was incredibly valuable for the way the bullpen was going to have to be used for the rest of the game.
Absolutely. And he, I think it's a shame because what Tyone did is probably going to get forgotten. When we think about the 2025 playoff run. But it's too bad because he went from the guy that people were ready to cut from the roster not that long ago to the guy who, when your backs are up against the wall in the playoffs and you're like, who do we want starting the game? Tyone's name was the one that kept coming up over and over again. And even to the point where, there were a lot of Cubs fans, I think, would have liked to have seen him start Game 5 of the division series and would have been quite happy about it. So that's really saying something, and I think he's earned that. And so credit to Jameson Taillon for taking himself from where he was in that first year of his contract with the Cubs to the guy that he's grown into with this organization. So I do look forward to next year and kind of what he does for the rotation.
Yeah, it's hard to think back to those 2 years ago when he first came. The first half of the season, he was so brutal. And now here we are, and he's really, he absolutely proved himself to be a gamer, and good for him, I think, he's one of those guys who, and he's not a young guy either at this point. What is he, like 34 or something at this point? And so, it's nice to see him get a moment like this. I mean, the guy was a Pirate, for crying out loud. That's how long ago he's been.
Yeah. Once upon a time, he was like a Pittsburgh top prospect. So
at least we were able to free him from that prison.
Yes, and the Cubs bullpen able to survive Kittredge giving up a run as Thielbar and Keller are able to hang on for the Cubs 4-3 victory. But you're right, Pat. That was absolutely nail-biting as the Brewers were slowly
and it was
starting to chip
long.
away.
The first inning was like 50 minutes. It's like, oh my God, I don't even want to physically be able to take this. I was so it was like nighttime when the game ended, like real nighttime. It's funny how it was like a 4-hour game. It felt like, I don't know, probably it wasn't 4 hours. It was only 3 something. But the way games are so fast now, you get kind of used to these quick games, and This was playoff baseball, and or as we
3
used
hours,
to call it,
13 minutes.
Yeah.
3 hours,
Yeah.
13 minutes.
as we would have said like 8 years ago, just a normal game would have been about 3 hours and 13 minutes. So
I did have a moment during that game where I realized how spoiled I'm getting because I was like getting antsy about how long the game was taking, and then I looked at what time it was, and I thought, oh no, it's only been 2 hours and 20 minutes. So yeah.
So post game, there, Cubs able to hang on. They get a game at home. What was the atmosphere like there, Jared, after that win?
I was very much like this was step one. They were happy, but it was happy in the way that you would see them happy in the clubhouse after a win in July. Like very much like we have business to take care of here. A little bit of talk, not necessarily among the players, but some of like the team staff about like winning 3 in a row in the playoffs and backs against the wall. Like we've seen the Cubs do this before. Granted, that was a completely different Cubs team than the one that's out there that now. But going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that's a part of how I think that 2016 team changed, the way that this organization thinks about things. So
when PCA was in 8th grade,
yeah,
team?
yeah,
okay,
middle schooler Pete Armstrong, but yeah, that was kind of the vibe in that clubhouse. Was like, all right, we won that one, and now it's time to let's go out there and win the next one. And so nothing like overly celebratory.
Pat, you and I were in attendance as well for the for Game 3. I'm sorry, for Game 4, where the Cubs won 6-0. And the story here is the bounce back performance from Boyd as he comes out here, 4 2/3, 6 strikeouts, no earned runs, just a huge performance when Ian Happ hits a 3-run home run to give him a first inning lead as well. So the Cubs jumping out early again, and Boyd turning in a huge performance. Just super impressive to see.
Jared, answer me this, because I was sitting in different seats for Game 4 than I was during the 2016 run when I sat in the same seats for every game. People were saying that they thought, and I think a lot of it is because social media tends to attract younger people who probably don't remember 2016 or weren't at any of those games. But I heard a lot of, well, this is the loudest Wrigley Field's ever been.
No.
I'm like, were you at the Dodgers game when Montero hit the grand slam? I thought the building was going to collapse. That's how loud that was. I mean, I could feel the seats in section, like, the 100 section, our seats were shaking on the cement that they were located. And I was looking at the upper deck and I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's going to cave in on us. Yeah. That to me was the loudest I've ever been at a game personally. I don't know. This was loud. Don't get me wrong. And compared to other Major League Baseball parks, I'm sure it was much louder than most. Right. But
yeah, it was definitely very loud. The loudest I've heard it there in a long time. But I think you're right. There is a lot of recency bias when it comes to that. And yeah, probably a lot of people who weren't in the ballpark in 2016 when, some of these moments were happening. I would argue even that the David Bodie grand slam in 2018, that was one of the moments when I thought like, oh, wow, this is.
When we signed off the podcast and had to come back on 20 minutes later.
We had to redo the ending of the podcast, yes.
I could hear the crowd from my office in the back of the house here, from the ballpark, because I live close enough. And I'm like, oh my God, the Cubs just, something. And I was, because I'd been watching the game and I went back and forth, you're right. And then with the 2 strikes and he hits it on that Sunday night.
Sunday night baseball.
Game. Yeah.
It's the Nationals.
The stakes were a little bit lower, but boy, that was a fun one too.
Yeah. And I just use that as a reference point for like, when I think of some of the loudest moments I've ever heard there, that's up there. And so
the Ramirez grand slam in 2007 in July, or the 3-run home run against the Brewers. That was a huge one.
So, there's definitely times when like, and Game 4 was very loud. But yeah, not necessarily the loudest, but I will say, and I'm sure you guys are getting to this, but like the Freddie chants,
Yeah.
That was, I look back on that now, having had a few days to like think about it. I think that's one of the coolest games I have ever been in Wrigley for. Just the way that felt. And it's, it's a shame that the series turned out the way that it did, because you don't want that moment to be lost in Cubs history, because that was such an incredible thing to be in there to hear, because it was like unnerving to listen to as a person sitting in the press box. I can't imagine.
It was like, I think it got into his head a little bit too there.
100%.
It absolutely
did. I think it got in the head of the whole team.
It sounded it sounded almost threatening the way that they were saying it too. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like a haunted kind of like
haunting. Yeah.
It was weird.
And like, I genuinely think that team was so desperate and glad to get out of Wrigley Field after that night, that if anything, you look at how they played in Game 5, they weren't that great. They just got lucky that the Cubs were worse.
I definitely thought that when the Cubs won that in the way they did, that the Cubs were kind of bullying them around a little bit in that game. And then every call went against the Cubs, whether it was the home run by Kelly, whether it was the play first base, and it didn't matter. Like the Brewers couldn't get on base. I mean, that was the problem. And they couldn't get on base the next day either. It's like, I felt like the pressure was starting to get to them in that Game 4. Like, you could start to see them really start to become unnerved and buckle a little bit, because they're like, oh my gosh, we're going to blow this.
Yes. And even Pat Murphy said it after Game 4. I wish I had the quote in front of me, but he said something to the effect of, we've got a young team, and I think that, more or less the pressure of the moment does get to them at times. And so, I mean, that's him more or less admitting to the thing that we're suspecting, is that, the crowd had such a profound impact in Game 4 that it wouldn't have taken much in Game 5 for that to have carried over. I think
had the Cubs gotten off to a lead in Game 5,
absolutely. I
think even a 2-run lead, like in the first inning or second inning, I think you would have seen. And now part of the problem was that Mizorowski was so good, but
right. And credit to him for because they came very close when Suzuki homered to tie the game.
Yeah,
I had a little moment where I thought, okay, here it is. But Mizorowski said afterwards that because he threw a lot more off speed, a lot more breaking pitches than he has against the Cubs in the past. And he said when he threw a fastball and Suzuki jumped on it and hit it over the fence, he said then he knew, okay, they're on my fastball, and so then he moved away from it, and that's where the Cubs just couldn't respond. And even before the game, a lot of us were, writers were sitting around eating and said, we kind of thought it would come down to whenever Mizorowski pitches, that's going to be the decisive part of the game.
Was he on his game or not? Yeah,
exactly. And so
that's what we were thinking.
When I saw that he was on his game, that was when it started to hit me like, okay, I don't think they're going to do this. Particularly,
and he pitched so many innings too. I mean, he was able to get through. They had that one chance with 2 men on base, right?
Yes.
And Tucker was up, and he had the full count. Actually, it's 3-1 at one point, then full count, right? And a healthy Kyle Tucker, I don't know. Maybe you feel differently, but it seemed like when he came back for those 3 Cardinals games and then the 8 playoff games, he's kind of a shell of himself right now. I mean, he was drawing walks, and he had the 1 homer off the AAA pitcher, but it was just hard for him to get any kind of a the kind of swings he was getting before just weren't there.
You could see that his balance wasn't right. You could see it when he was running the bases, he can't run at full speed. This is a guy that under different circumstances probably wouldn't even have been active.
Right. I agree.
And so, because the one in that at bat, the 5th pitch of that at bat in the 6th inning with runners on first and second, nobody out, Kyle Tucker up the bat, and the 5th pitch, you look at it, and Aaron Ashby hyped it down the middle, 98 miles an hour, but dead center of the zone, and Kyle Tucker fouled it off.
Yeah.
And that's the spot where maybe
that should be the home run.
100%.
Or the double,
Or at least, right, because at that point it was a 2-1 game. And so that's where you could flip the game right there. And
Yep.
again, like we were saying a couple of minutes ago, if you flip that game there, that's probably it, because for the Brewers, then that becomes the pressure's all on them, because they're realizing, oh, it's happening. We're blowing this, and you're playing tight, and then that's probably it. So that was your moment. That was the spot, and
That was it.
They didn't get it done.
And he's like your MVP, your cleanup hitter. I mean, to lose a guy like that was very unfortunate, because he's the guy who, healthy and hitting well, he's a top 10 hitter in baseball. Like, it's a huge loss, more so than Steele or even Horton in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just the combination of all of those players not being available, it is kind of remarkable that the Cubs even made it as far into the playoffs as they did. Ask any other team, you're going to lose two of your best starting pitchers, and the best hitter in your lineup is going to be playing at about 70%.
And your other best two starting pitchers are going to both be in scuffling badly, in the year. Yeah.
Yeah. How far do you think you're going to get? And it's probably, you're going to look like the Cincinnati Reds in the wild card round, and just, it'll be over before you even know it.
That sixth inning was the entire ball game, especially when behind Tucker, you have Suzuki, who had a hit in the game, obviously, but everybody else was struggling behind him. Happ 0 for 4, Kelly 1 for 4, PCA 0 for 3, Swanson was miserable 0 for 3, Shaw nothing. You had nothing besides the top half of that lineup there.
Cubs had like 3 hits, right? I mean, come on, that's it really expect to win games with 3 hits. Pitching was fine.
Yeah. Because ordinarily, if you're just giving up a couple of solo homers, that's not really a big deal. But yeah, they had 4 total hits, and one of which is the Suzuki homer. So besides Suzuki's homer, you have 3 base hits across 8 other innings, and that's just you cannot win a baseball game that way.
Why couldn't we have combined our pitching from Game 5 with our hitting from Game 2? Won one of those, I think. Yeah.
So. I was happy that I didn't have to watch the Brewers celebrate at Wrigley Field. That's always a positive. If they're going to lose, I'm glad they did it in Milwaukee, so we didn't have to see a celebration.
Yeah, and I had 2 chances to do it too, because for games 3 and 4, and I've sat through some of these celebrations before. They suck. I watched the Marlins do it in 2003. I watched the Arizona Diamondbacks do it in 2007. I watched the Mets do it in 2015. At Colorado, you remember the Colorado game? I mean, that really sucks. Thank God we didn't have to do it for the Marlins in 2020, because they won't let anybody to the stadium.
And given how classy the Brewers organization has been, in the wake of their series win. It's really is a shame they didn't get to do it at Wrigley, because they've handled it with such
a lot of loser energy from them, isn't it? It really is like the little brother kind of like one-sided rivalry kind of thing, I guess.
And it's somebody dug up what the Cardinals tweeted in 2015. I'm sure you guys have seen it.
Yes.
What the Cardinals tweeted in 2015 when the Cubs beat them in the division series.
Yeah. The Cardinals tweeted, "Congratulations to the Chicago Cubs on a hard-fought series win. Represent the NL Central well." That was the Cardinals tweet, and the response was, basically, doubt the Brewers would have handled it the same way. Yeah.
No, they remind me of the Pistons back in '91 when the Bulls beat them and they walked off the court during the game. That kind of thing. That's what they would have done. They would have just walked off the field before the game ended.
And I get that, like, the social media managers for your team are not the players, but the players themselves also showed you what kind of people they are with how they handled their celebrations, because they chose to hold up an L flag in their team photo, which I think is something that, like, if you're going to end up making a real deep run in these postseasons and, God forbid, win the World Series, that's really like a part of what you want to be your World Series story. It's kind of a shame.
It's a bit of a cell phone, because I thought they were saying they were losers, which I
They are.
Yeah.
They are. So and listen, like,
And now I
my
feel for the Dodgers. Like, good God, like, why did you make life so hard for me?
and I'm like, and I'm happy to say this even as somebody who, in my role, my job is to be objective, but I think I can objectively say that to conduct yourselves in that way after a division series win, even against a rival, is low class. It's poor. It's kind of gross. And so
when the Cubs beat the Padres, especially after the whole '84 debacle, we finally got back at them 41 years later. Not the same, by the way, for everybody who thought that we had avenged that loss. We did not avenge the World Series opportunity. It's not the same. But like, we were all celebrating the Cubs. I don't think anybody thought twice about the Padres after the game. I mean, my God, like, the last thing I saw the Padres doing were like spitting on umpires and stuff in the dugouts and shoving them and stuff. But like, we weren't like, oh, Manny Machado, ha ha ha, you suck or whatever. Like, I don't care.
Yeah,
like,
and it's
moving on.
It is, like, right. To be fair, it's not quite the same because it's Cubs Brewers is different. But yeah, there is the feeling of like, celebrate what you have accomplished, celebrate your win by all means. The Brewers haven't won a playoff series in quite some time, but
after Game 7 against Cleveland, like, when we were leaving the stadium, like, I was like, I felt bad for these guys, like, for their fans. I mean, I was happy for us. Obviously, we would have had to win, but I felt bad they had to be the victims, right? And they were gracious about it. Like, hey, you know what? If it couldn't be us, at least it's you. Okay, well, that's a nice way to do it,
And you would expect, like, at least a interdivision respect for each other. We play each other all the time. It's been this like fierce rivalry for a while. Hey, tip of the cap, like, we got you this time, but you never know how it's going to go next time, like that sort of thing. So it was just very revealing to me, and it's too bad because if I'm a Brewers fan, like it, and if I have any kind of like character, then this doesn't sit well with me.
Very immature, and I was surprised that, frankly, Murphy let them do that.
I thought more of him, to be honest. Yeah.
He's a grown-up, right? He's an old man. Like, he should be better than this. Like, he just should. And considering that, like, he wouldn't even be a Major League Baseball manager if it weren't for Craig Counsell at all, right? Never would have been in a clubhouse at all. You think he could be a little bit less of a jerk about it, frankly.
Yeah, and it is surprising because in my interactions with him, I came away with nothing but a good impression. I really enjoy the guy. So it does surprise me that this is something that he allowed to happen. Disappointing.
Yeah. And yet, ultimately, I don't care about any of those guys, like, on the Brewers, and they want to act like, idiots, fine, whatever. But it would have been nice for the Cubs to play the Dodgers, I think. Again, that would have been fun.
It would have been fun.
There's like a little playoff rivalry between those teams now. We've played 3 times. We've won 1, we lost 2, and in fact, I think the Dodgers are the team that Cubs have played the most in the playoffs in history, like, in modern history. National League team, anyway.
And I would have liked to have gotten a chance to, this being Clayton Kershaw's final run. Like, let's, let's get to see him.
Can you imagine the Kershaw chance that would have?
Yeah.
Well, let's. I want your thoughts first, Jared, and then you, Pat. The 2025 season, was it successful, even with the way it ended?
I say without a doubt, yes. Your regular season, you improved by 9 wins. It's hard to look at a season where you win 92 games and feel bad about it. The fact that they didn't win the division, I think, has a lot more to do with the fact that the Brewers just got crazy hot. And there's just really not much you can do about that. The Cubs beat them head-to-head during the regular season, so you did what you could on that end. And then even with the wild card, you made the most of that, advanced past the wild card round, and then just a couple of maybe a poor pitching plan in the division series, bats that striking out more than they could get away with in that series kept you from winning, but you still pushed it to 5 games. And so I think it's not the same as 2015 at all, but there is a similar feeling of like, you got in, you made a little bit of a run, you've got something to build on. So to me, 2025 was definitely a success.
Pat?
I think it was a qualified success. I think it was a success that they made the playoffs and they won a playoff round. That was important to me. I said if they had lost to the Padres, that would not have been a successful season. So they cleared that bar. They took the Brewers to 5 games. They didn't embarrass. I can remember some years like in 07 and 08. You can win 98 games, but if you get swept in the in a 3-game play, basically they carried themselves well. I think the players that were on the team played their hearts out. They did the best they could. Some of them were hurt. Some of them just weren't great to begin. I mean, they didn't have as much talent as you would have liked, but everybody played to the extent of their abilities. And I don't look back and say, oh man, so and so really just sucked and that's why we lost. I mean, they were all playing well. My one reservation is that I feel that they could have been better had they been given more help in the off season, at the trade deadline. I don't care when, you name it, but they were undermanned from the get-go, and then the injuries happened, and that just made it harder. And I feel like it was the situation was made harder on the roster than it needed to be. Craig Counsell's job was harder than it needed to be because they didn't always have a lot of good options. We spent much of the year using like a bullpen by committee because we didn't have a fit starter because of injuries. We spent much of the year without any kind of a bench whatsoever, right? Like just negligible. And so, I mean, some of this stuff was a little self-inflicted. The Brewers got super hot, but as usual, it took the Cubs a month to figure out the bullpen and cost some games early on during the Pressey era. And
Pressey era, that's right.
And so there were some things that could have been better, I think. But I don't have any qualms with how these particular players tried and played. I think they all did what they could, and so the ultimate result was pretty good. I mean, not only one team's going to win the World Series, right? And as we know, it's usually not us. But it could have been better. I do flatly reject the 2015 analogy that I hear a lot of people using, because this is nowhere. I don't think this is anywhere near 2015. The Cubs do not have a young core of players. The Cubs have 3 young players. They have Pete Crow-Armstrong, Matt Shaw, and Cade Horton. And then they've got a couple young players in Ballesteros and Casey who haven't really, and we don't know yet, right? They haven't demonstrated. But the 2015 team was stacked with Schwarber and Soler and Baez and Russell. And I mean, even Hendricks, like young guys who had proven on, and Bryant and Rizzo, they'd proven on the field that they were good, which is what really gave us, I think, that inspiration for the future. Even Wilson Contreras, right? So we were like, oh yeah, this team has like 8 really 9, 10 young quality players that are 25 or under. We're going to rock and roll. This Cubs team has a lot of guys in their mid 30s, and the pitching staff and the roster itself is mostly guys. I mean, they're all like going to be between 28 and 30 something next year, except for Pete, right? If they have the current team they have now. So they have a lot of work to do this offseason, I think, in order to get better, or to even be the same, probably, especially if you lose a Kyle Tucker to free agency. You don't really know what you have in PCA, which is the real tricky part, right? You just don't know at all. Is he as good as the first half, as bad as the second half? Is he somewhere in between? Your guess is as good as mine. And it's going to cost money to do it, probably. They might have to make some trades, but it also costs money, and I don't know if they're going to spend that money. So it's going to be a real tricky off season. They don't even have a lot of flexibility because they don't have a lot of free agents on this team. Like, most of the guys are going to be here. They've got 3 offensive players who are free agents. Justin Turner, gone. Willie Castro, probably gone. And then Kyle Tucker, gone, right? That's it. Everybody else is either no trade clause or they're under contract, and so you're going to run back a lot of the same guys you had last year, I think.
Yeah, because when you look at that group of 3 in particular, only one of those is a player of any note.
Yeah.
As far as
pitching's the same way.
Yeah.
Pitchers are all going to be back. Although the one pitching question I should ask you is, Imanaga's got this weird deal with his contract, I guess, where the Cubs have to decide whether to give him a 3-year extension for 50-some million, or he can become a free agent. Does that sound right?
Is that going into this offseason, or
I think
another
so.
year before?
Yeah, I think it's this offseason.
Interesting.
It's one of those opt-out like team
Right.
option deals. So that'll be something to watch. But other than that, you're going to have Boyd back, you'll have Tyon back, you'll have Steele hopefully at some point next year, Horton. The bullpen guys, they come and go. I mean, Drew Pomeranz is going to be 105 next year. I don't know. Will he be back? Maybe not. Brad Keller might be one they try to bring back. Maybe Kittredge, who knows? But
well, that's the one thing that the Cubs have done really well with for the last several years is finding these guys and putting together a bullpen that proves to be really effective. So that's one part of the roster I don't worry about a whole lot, just in terms of how they're going to build that. I think it's looking at their offensive profile and finding the right fits to help counteract some of the like high swing and miss guys that are in the lineup. You look at the number of strikeouts they had during the postseason. I think it was close to 50 strikeouts during the wild card round, and the fact that you won that round despite striking out that much is pretty remarkable. And that continued in the division series. And so looking at things like that, guys that struggle against high velocity, high in the zone pitches, when that's the trend that is developing in the league, where guys that can throw upper 90s, triple digits, and get it high in the zone.
Conversely, the Cubs don't have a lot of pitchers that throw
right
high 90s.
We're all still throwing.
Palencia is such a aberration from the norm here. When he comes in, it's like, wow.
Yeah, he throws 100 when meanwhile a lot of other teams have like 5 guys that can do that.
Even like teams like the Pirates do, which is frustrating.
Right. So, that's looking ahead to 2026. I think that's the one thing I've got my eye on the most is where you can add to the offense, and it's going to be limited, is how you are adding some variety to the mix as far as offensive profiles go.
Jeremy wants a starting pitcher too. Right, Jeremy? I don't want to cut you short on that one.
Sure, dude. Before we get into that, I do have the points on Imanaga's contract. So he signed his deal in January of 2024. It was a 4-year deal, $53 million. After this season that just finished, now the Cubs can decide to exercise a club option to extend him into a 5th year. If they do, then the contract total is $80 million instead of the $50 million. If the Cubs decline the option, then Imanaga has the right to opt out of the deal altogether and become a free agent, or he can stay under the original 4-year deal, which is probably more likely. The same thing happens again after 26. So after 26, the Cubs have another option they could pick up, but if they decline, Imanaga can opt out or continue to stick with the deal.
He may have pitched himself into 2 more years of the Cubs here.
Sure did. Sure did.
And he'll be 32 next year too. But my concern, and Jeremy is, and we both actually, but Jeremy in particular has wanted to get another starting pitcher, both in the offseason last year, which would have helped a lot. And also now in the offseason this year. If we'd gotten Max Fried or somebody like that last year, the Cubs are playing the Dodgers next round, frankly, I think, and might have even won the division. But without that, you look at the free agent pitchers, there's a lot of them out there for next year. But honestly, do you have any reason to believe the Cubs would give any pitcher a 5 or 6 or 7 year deal? I don't. I mean, the last
not with an impending work stoppage, they are not going to do any
long-term deals
at this point.
Like the last long-term deal they did was Darvish, but they only did that one because his price fell dramatically, late in the offseason. And really, Lester was the last guy they actually went out and that was in December of 2014. That was a while ago,
a long time ago.
So do you see them I'd love to have a Michael King. I'd love to have, or I'd even take a Dylan Cease. I would take, any number of pitchers that are going to be available, but it's not going to happen, is it? I mean, they might trade for a pitcher. They might trade Ballesteros and somebody else and try to work something out, but I don't see them signing a pitcher, which is a shame because, they've got, they were what were they, 3rd in total revenue this year of all baseball teams, 14th in payroll,
Among those same lines, I'll pose the question to you guys. It was, we asked our listeners, if they had any questions, and a question from both Matt from Iowa on Blue Sky as well as iOS Forever on X. Both asked where you guys think a reasonable offer for Tucker to come back to the Cubs would be. and if he's inclined to take something like that.
Oh, I've got one, and I want Jared to then laugh at me when I say this. Ready? So the Cubs will not offer. Well, first of all, the $500 million or whatever they were talking a couple months ago may not happen.
Gone.
Period.
No.
I think that the only way the Cubs could re-sign him would be on what I would call like a Bellinger on steroids type of deal. In other words, if the Cubs offered him a $8,320 million contract, which is like $40 million a year, but he had an opt-out after the first year, the third year, and the fifth year, he might be willing to do it to bet on himself. It would make sense. I don't think the Cubs will make that deal, but I could see another team doing it. I could see another team saying, yeah, sure, we'll give you 8 years and 320 with opt-outs, every other year or something like that. But I think the Cubs would probably be inclined to only do like a 3-year deal, or something with at a high price, $50 million a year or whatever, with opt-outs after each year. But I bet somebody would do that. And if you're Kyle Tucker, $320 million would be still generational money, life-changing money, and you could kind of bet on yourself. It's a low risk proposition, because if you have a great first year, you opt out, and then boom, you're back at it, right?
And I would think like he put up okay numbers in 2025, but there's injuries kind of got in the way.
Yeah.
So I think most teams would look at what he did this season and say, okay, well, we know that he's capable of more. The question mark becomes, this is now 2 years in a row where
that's right.
He's been hampered in this way.
And the difference was 2 years ago when he got hurt, he was fantastic every time he played. And when he didn't play, he was out. This year, he was fantastic for the first couple of months, and then wasn't so fantastic, right? But kept playing. I mean, granted, we're told he was hurt. We found out a month later, as of course always happens. So maybe teams start to get nervous, like you say, injury, right? Is he injury prone now? I'm sure the Rockies probably won't hire him or pay for him, because they'll have Chris Bryant PTSD for doing it. But that is going to be a concern. Teams don't want to, he's not getting a 10-year deal. I don't think he's not getting a $500 million deal. It's going to be a haircut from that at best.
Yeah, and I think though everything about his demeanor, especially after Game 5 when he was asked about this is a guy who's, if he's re-signing with the Cubs, it's only going to be because the Cubs offered him the best deal.
Right.
He does not talk at all like somebody who has any desire to stay.
I love Chicago. My wife and I love being here. Blah blah blah. Right. We want to raise a family here. No, none of that.
He said his exact words on Saturday night after Game 5 were, it was an honor to play with these guys. He's he was done, and like, and I get it. Like, if you think you've got the opportunity to go out and make as much money as possible, I'm not ever going to criticize you for trying to do that. But I think that's just something worth like Cubs fans considering. He doesn't sound at all like somebody who really is going to stay in Chicago because, oh, hey, I just loved it at Wrigley so much.
But some guys buy into Wrigley Field scene, the Wrigley Field thing. John Lester, bought a beautiful house nearby with his family, raised his kids here. I mean, like, people do that, right? Yu Darvish loved it here. I mean, Rizzo loved. I mean, there were guys who stayed here in the off season sometimes. Well, obviously when they were vacationing in warmer places, but like weren't just like here and then on the last day of the season gone, and we'll see in after spring training. I mean, there are people that had ties here and roots here. He's not one of them. He's not that guy.
No, not at all. And there are plenty of, to your point, plenty of other examples of guys where that Chicago effect, that Wrigley effect really does sink in. And even guys who
like Mark Grace and like guys who just love it here,
and guys who didn't spend the majority of their career with the Cubs and yet somehow become ambassadors for the team. I think, Ben Zobrist, obviously winning a World Series with the Cubs makes a big difference, but like you look at where he spent most of his career, it wasn't in Chicago, and yet he's here all the time. And so
Henry Dawson doesn't want to wear an Expos hat into the Hall of Fame, right?
Right.
Like it's a Cubs hat.
Exactly. I mean, and he's at Wrigley Field, and it's not as if he can go to an Expos game anymore, but there's and Ian Happ, he's not on the level as some of these other guys, but if you look at the way he spoke about the Cubs after the loss last night and the fact that he insisted on a no trade clause, like I genuinely think he's a guy who's going to do what he can to retire with the team.
Yeah, he'll break Bleacher Jeff's heart if he leaves.
Right? Who's going to pass him beer money?
Yeah, exactly. No, he'll be a team ambassador, right?
Oh,
when he leaves.
absolutely.
I mean, this is his team.
Think you'll see him, on marquee. I mean, he's gonna he loves the Cubs, so
he'll be selling coffee in one of the shops at the hotel. I mean, like that's just gonna be his thing.
And for a guy who, grew up in Pittsburgh, went to college in Cincinnati, but then this is where his heart clearly is. It just all that again speaks to there are guys where this team really gets in their blood, but it has not had that effect on Kyle Tucker.
So Tucker's gone unless nobody else wants him for whatever odd reason, and the Cubs end up having to pay him like $50 million on a 1 year, or a short-term deal that has options after each year, right? That's basically, and the odds of that are low. Yeah, the odds of that are probably low. So,
well, we will unpack a lot of roster speculation over the next few months as we will pop in for additional podcasts as we look towards the end of season wrap ups.
I can just see your teaser now. Will the Cubs pick up the option on Kittredge or not? That's
God. There's
tune in for the next 45 minutes as we break down.
Yeah.
So we will be talking though a lot about roster speculation as we look at you mentioned it, Pat, like there's a lot of unknowns for your core. Your core is PCA. Is he a 30-30 guy every year at this point?
Will Matt Shaw be able to hit in the majors? I think so, but I don't know.
You don't know yet. Yeah.
We don't know.
Can he slug enough to play third base? I don't know.
And if a Tucker leaves, does this team feel that a Casey's good enough, and they're going to keep going with hey, we had great luck with how Horton and PCA and Shaw all developed in 1 year. Let's double down on this.
I think they're going to try to trade Seiya and see if he'll agree to no trade clause. Letting him trade him, even though there's no trade clause, because I think they want Ballesteros in that DH role, and they really have no place for Ballesteros if Seiya is the DH. Is that fair? Really?
I agree.
Yeah.
So it'll be an interesting winter, an interesting offseason. The Cubs have options. Will they do things? Or will they be kind of just in a holding pattern and run back what they did and give the kids a year while waiting for the impending work stoppage and CBA negotiations?
Have you heard any scuttlebutt about that, Jared? About the tentativeness of making long-term deals with this situation kind of on the horizon?
No, nothing outside of just the normal speculation that's kind of in everybody's minds. So we'll see, but yeah, it's definitely out there, but nothing like specific that leads me to believe more strongly than I already do that's a real possibility.
And no scuttlebutt about Kyle Tucker to the Dodgers for $500,000 plus $400 million deferred in the year 2040.
just mark it for mid-November. They'll announce that deal.
Yeah.
All right. So make sure you're staying subscribed to the podcast on both YouTube for the video version of the podcast and all of your audio podcatchers of choice, because we'll be popping in as news happens, things happen. We'll be dropping in. We'll, at bare minimum, check in once a month, but hopefully more than that because the Cubs are doing some moves. And so make sure you stay subscribed so you don't miss an episode. And with that, we're going to wrap it up for this week. Jared, please remind our listeners how they can find all your work on the internet.
Yeah, come find my written work at allchgo.com. That's where I do all my Cubs coverage. And then, of course, I have my Substack newsletter called The Dugout, which you can subscribe to. So just go on Substack, search my name and The Dugout, and it'll pop up. I would love if you join me over there.
And thank you, Jared, for coming on so many times this season, and it's always a blast getting to catch up with you and talk Cubs. And you're a key part of this show, and we definitely couldn't have done another season without you. So definitely thank you for all the time you put in with us.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat, and make sure you stay subscribed as well. Thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. Another season in the books for us, ad-free, because they helped foot the bill. Every single penny goes right back into this show, and we were able to not run ads for another year thanks to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. So thank you. You guys are so important to this show. We literally couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much to them as well. And Pat, thank you for joining us all season.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's been a blast. Again, another year down.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.